Now, of course, Trump wasted no time as he was sworn in for a second term, using his inauguration to parade a series of executive orders. Among his first actions were measures to expand U.S. territory, tighten immigration laws, boost fossil fuel production, and roll back environmental regulations. With this decisive start, as it's being described, what can be expected from Trump's second term? Let's discuss this and many other issues with political analyst Professor Kedibone, who joins us now via our video link. Prof, lovely to see you, and what a time to be alive, as they say. Let me start by just gauging from you what you make of Trump's inaugural speech, especially where you consider the contents thereof. He seemed to be a calm person, but he didn't mince his words, even when it came to addressing what he reckons are the faults of the previous administration, with Joe Biden sitting right behind him.
Good morning, Ayanda, and thank you for the opportunity. Of course, I think Trump is a typical businessman who has the levers of government. And what he's trying to do is to use that to deal with what he generally considers as the frustrations that the general and average American faces. And so he does not really act like a typical politician who would want to go through consensus to make a case for the political party to understand why certain decisions need to be made in the manner that they are being made. So I think he's actually also trying to demonstrate to his predecessors that there is indeed a case for his presidency, that there are problems on the ground, as he has mentioned, the problems of immigration, the problems of health, and so on. And so he is also trying to demonstrate. And in fact, what is even more interesting is to see the new departments, government efficiency. And that is going to be a very interesting model, I think, for many other countries to try and understand how can you make government more efficient, because traditionally governments are about process, they are about bureaucracy, they are about procedure. So this is going to be quite interesting to see if all these executive orders can actually be factored or used in a way with this department of the new Department of Government Efficiency. So it's quite interesting development for us, and we need to watch this space and see if there is some level of change in the manner that the global systems of governance are going to change.
Absolutely. Governance is also about constitutionalism. It'll be interesting to see the extent to which some of these orders will pass constitutional muster, including, of course, a proposed termination to the recognition of birthright citizenship. In other words, those born in America being considered American citizens by virtue of their birth. I wonder, in your mind, whether there is a way around this, given how clear the country's constitution is around specifically this issue.
This is going to be interesting indeed, and with many other executive orders that he has put in place, because the ideal is that you cannot do an executive order that is not linked to a legislation. So usually it is based on the interpretation of the legislation and to give effect into how he has interpreted that kind of a legislation to then come up with an executive order. So we have seen that in some cases, obviously there will be the NGOs that will be coming after him and challenging some of these decisions. So I think it is a start of a very interesting presidency, just as we've seen during his 45th president tenure. So he is a man of action, and I think there will be a lot of activities and turbulent kind of presidency. But one thing that you don't take away from him is that he says what he does, and he does what he says. So you are never really confused on what is his position on certain issues that the Americans are faced with.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. If you were to ask me, I'd say those who love and hate Trump do so for the same reason. He's typically the type of person who'll follow through on what he says. With that in mind then, are you as critical of Joe Biden's decision, for example, to grant those preemptive pardons to a whole range of people, including members of his family, in a context where Donald Trump has suggested that there'd be retribution once he takes office?
Yeah, so the last point is quite interesting, Ayanda, that especially because Joe Biden is a career politician. So we actually begin to see that career politicians everywhere else, have the same tendencies to kind of look out for themselves. What can they benefit and how can they use the system maximally to benefit themselves, people around them. But what is quite interesting is to see if the president of the U.S. is actually able to do many of the things that he said he is going to do, looking into, for example, the issues of the immigration, which is a global scale problem. And Americans are actually, on the ground, are also very agitated in so many ways. And I think we've seen and we've had this kind of conversations across, many countries of the world, in Europe, in South Africa, in the US. So it is a frustration, but it's a very complex issue to deal with. And I'm not so sure that the kind of steps that the president has taken are actually going to address the issues of immigration. Because it's not just a person leaving their country and coming to you. It is much more complex than what meets the eye. So It will be interesting again if we will see a lot of pushback from the civil rights groups that are going to say that there are human rights violations from some of the executive orders from the president in dealing with, issues of immigration. So this, I think, is going to be one major turbulent issue during his tenure, because he actually has immediately started with this.
Right.
Largely it is because his presidency, his rise into power, his politics leans more towards the right. And we've seen a lot of these kind of parties in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, in the Netherlands, and in France, that there will be this kind of leaders who have the same views about this kind of issues of immigration, that are much more considered to be anti-immigration. And they are not always very cordial with the rights group. So we want to see, in fact, if he succeeds in this, he would set a very important precedent that migrants are going to start suffering throughout the world. So I think it is going to be a very interesting issue on how other countries and how other political parties in many of these countries are going to take a cue on this.
Absolutely. Briefly, Prof, if you can, speaking about some of those human rights considerations and this brand of politics, another sort of eyebrow-raising declaration he made is that America henceforth only has two genders. We know, of course, this is in reference to the different identity politics that in some ways made it into national discourse. I wonder how you reckon something like that is going to land, given, of course, just the ways in which many people had become accustomed to how people identify.
Yeah, that is going to be very difficult for him. And I can't see how he's just going to get away with that, because there are issues, as you correctly say, issues of identity. And they're not just public issues. There are issues that are also within many of the, laws where you need, in the work environment, in our political organization, in our NGOs, on how we need to accept and treat one another, irrespective of race, gender, affiliations, and so on. So it is going to be extremely important to see how he actually is going to manage to get away with this. So we need to observe this very, very closely. As I have said, if he wins this one, we know that the issues of inclusive kind of politics are going to be in trouble in the next few years, because Americans are, they are considered, it's one of the oldest democracy on earth, and so it sets a lot of tone to many democracies around the world. So it's quite important to pay attention, in fact, at what is happening at their back door.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no need to over-explain that point at the very least, Prof. We all know that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, as they say. So we'll have to watch the space for the next 4 years. Professor Kedibone, for now, thanks very much indeed. Professor Phago speaking to us there as a political analyst.